My Lords, I too am grateful to the Noble Baroness for the opportunity of this debate. I've just finished reading a book about wilding in the UK, and it's a classic story of how difficult it is to change a culture, attitudes and expectations from deeply embedded practices and convictions. In that case, about how we manage our land, which was very appropriate to the Environment Bill this week. The same difficulty applies in this debate, which I believe is less about government policy and more about how we as citizens choose to live. My main point, discussing the role behaviour change can play in helping us toward net zero carbon emissions, is this. It's essential that our expectations are aspirational but also realistic. They need to apply to all people, and it's my fear that the poorest 10% will not just be left behind, but left feeling that they are part of the problem when they would very much rather be part of the solution. The behaviour changes we wish to see have so far been inaccessible to many on low incomes, quite simply because they cost much more. I believe cars that are powered without petrol or diesel are the future, and I would hope to see a mix of financial incentives and legislation which will encourage our uptake and so change our choices. But they remain considerably more expensive in terms of outlay and then do not hold their value. A petrol car is cheaper and easier to sell on, and if I live in accommodation without a driveway, it's considerably easier to fill with the required fuel. And so it is with other goods, like locally grown organic food, which remains more expensive than highly processed food grown out of season abroad. And similarly, I have complete sympathy with any working single parent who decides to shop for the cheapest school shirts money can buy instead of those made of fair trade cotton. Food, clothing, travel, all these things remain prohibitively expensive for some. And when we seek to change the behaviour of the whole population, we must consider how we might incentivise price reductions or even subsidise these things to make them accessible to all. Also, the industries which employ people on lower incomes must be those we seek to incentivise and possibly most strongly penalise when they fail to make the necessary changes. Manufacturing, food production, aspects of the gig economy, these are all sectors which will have to put their greenhouses in order or presumably risk facing sanctions designed to force a change in behaviour. Wages could be pushed down, and jobs could even be lost to pay for the necessary changes in production and carbon offsetting, and the burden will be borne by those at the bottom of the pay scale. Finally, my Lords, it feels that every time I am here, I bring the same matter, and I follow the focus of the Noble Baroness Randerson, which is that public transport in the north of the country remains inadequate, particularly between the big cities, and most especially for those on low incomes who need it most. It is essential for the change of behaviour we seek, for the sake of the climate, that funding per head on transport infrastructure is, to use Her Majesty's government's own phrase, levelled up. One should not be surprised to find out that spending on transport infrastructure is higher in London than in any other part of the country, but the spending per head is so considerably high in the capital than the north of the country is less easy to comprehend. Indeed, I recently read that twice as much per head in the north than in the northwest, and more than 3 times as much as in Yorkshire and the Humber region. How can people be expected to change their behaviour and choices if the opportunity is not given them to do so? Without proper and fair investment in greener ways to travel, reliance on road travel will only increase, especially after the pandemic, which still impacts numbers who use our trains, trams and buses. In summary, my Lords, I think the blend of incentives and penalties that I've heard suggested will be essential in helping us all change our behaviour, something which is incredibly important and I think very possible as we seek to reach net zero carbon emissions. However, we must do it in a way and in a manner that does not leave any constituency behind. Lack of financial means should not prevent some from sharing the journey to net zero. As I mentioned the book that I've read just recently, a quote is given: "You can't be green if you're in the red."
My Lord,